Getting rich is easy. Make sure you only sell things that the super rich can buy. This strategy has worked wonders for Bernard Arnault, whose vast luxury empire has kept him in the top 10 of the Forbes rich list for 28 consecutive years. In 2024, he was crowned the richest man on the planet with a net worth of $233 billion. He's made the #1 spot a few times before, overtaking the likes of Bezos, Musk and Zuckerberg, yet he's nowhere near a household name. Unless you're really into luxury, of course, but even then, Arnault is a man of mystery. And that's how the 75-year-old luxury kingpin likes it. Scheming in the shadows and playing boardroom executives against each other is precisely how the young engineering student ended up owning 75 brands and counting. His portfolio includes Louis Vuitton, Hennessy, Marc Jacobs, Sephora and Dior. Nowadays, these names are huge, but there once was a time when they were suffering. Arnault's talent is seeking out undervalued icons and rebuilding them as money-making machines, which he pits against each other to generate profits. Given how much he understands the power of brands, it makes sense that he's carved out an image of himself as a savvy businessman, inspiring pioneer, and formidable opponent. Rivals and colleagues alike nicknamed him the Terminator for his ability to completely eradicate anyone who stands in his way. His life is like a Hollywood movie, filled with daring business moves and commercial setbacks. If his latest ambition succeeds, he'll not only have a virtual monopoly of the luxury sector, he'll remain the richest person in the world for a lot longer, because his top clients are everyone else on the Forbes rich list. So who exactly is Bernard Arnault? And how did he emerge from obscurity to become a multi-billionaire? Bernard Arnault is a French business magnate, investor, art collector and chairman of LVMH, Louis Vuitton, Moet Hennessy, which is one of the largest companies in the Eurozone by capitalization. Ending up this stinking rich makes sense because when Bernard was a child, he demonstrated an interest in money management and profit-making games. The chances are he was one of the first kids to play Monopoly, while everyone else was outside playing in the mud. Born March 5th, 1949, near the border of France and Belgium, to a pianist mother and manufacturing father. Post-war France saw a period of rebuilding helped by international programs and state investments, which culminated in an economic boom. As Bernard grew up in the splendor of these times, he enjoyed a typically affluent lifestyle: horse riding, piano lessons, and tennis. His father's construction business was doing well for the family, and Bernard was set up to eventually join the company. He pursued engineering at École Polytechnique, one of the country's most revered schools, with infamously tough entry requirements. Its military tradition dates back to the French Revolution, when it was founded, which undoubtedly refined Arnault's discipline, fortified his work ethic, and gave him the thrill of battle. Alumni include 3 presidents of France and 3 Nobel Prize winners. When Arnault's sons later went to École Polytechnique, they were taught literature by Brigitte Macron. But such a privileged education would have gone to waste had Arnault not been an intelligent and ambitious student. He excelled all throughout school and demonstrated an interest in business and finance. So when he graduated in 1971 with a degree in engineering, he was more than ready to help out at his father's firm. Yet Bernard saw potential in another area: real estate. After a few years, he persuaded his father to sell off the construction side of the business so that they could go all in on building luxury vacation homes. Convincing his old man to change course must not have been easy. His father had experienced hardship during World War II, so wouldn't have been so willing to risk the newfound financial stability that had given his family a good life. Construction had paid for his son's education, bought a home, and even funded his wife's passion for Dior perfumes. They may not have been millionaires, but their standing was strong enough that gambling it all was out of the question, especially on something as risky as real estate. After all, even real estate developers need construction. Surely construction was the safer, steadier option, even if profits may be less. Yet Bernard persuaded his father to do just that. That's a testament to the type of David versus Goliath battles Arnault would have throughout his career. sometimes as David, sometimes as Goliath. Under a new name, the company developed specialty holiday accommodations in what would have been the equivalent of the 1970s version of Airbnb. By 1976, Arnault even had timeshare properties, which was a new but lucrative sector at the time. And 1 year later, he was CEO. Then in 1979, the 29-year-old became president of the family business. It took 8 years for him to enter a company, reach the top, and make it richer. But real estate was just a means to an end for Bernard. He had his eyes set on something bigger, something that would make him mega rich. However, disagreement with the government of France meant he would have to pivot if he wanted to stay in the game. It's time to learn how history works as we explore the life story of Bernard Arnault. This week's video is proudly sponsored by Odoo. Odoo is an all-in-one business software solution designed for small and medium enterprises, offering tools for CRM, marketing, inventory management, and more. I've been exploring Odoo's website builder for a history project, creating a site to showcase fascinating stories from the past. Setting it up was surprisingly simple. The website builder is beginner-friendly, requiring no coding skills. I was able to drag, drop, and customize my site effortlessly. Plus, Odoo provides unlimited hosting, support, and a free custom domain for an entire year. The built-in ChatGPT integration made content creation a breeze, helping me write and refine engaging articles with ease. The entire process was smooth and enjoyable. Whether you're launching a personal project or a business website, Odoo's website builder is a fantastic choice. Get started today for free at odoo.com/r/YIH. It's never been easier to turn your ideas into reality. Right when Arnault was poised to take his company to new heights, France elected François Mitterrand in 1981. The socialist leader started on the Catholic nationalist right and even served under the Nazi puppet government. But his slide to the left and subsequent election not only pushed the communists out of the political race for good, it ushered in a wave of divisive reforms. As you can expect, some of the ideas didn't gel with an industrialist like Arnault. Things like a fifth week of paid vacation, setting up reductions in the working week, and nationalizing entire sections of industry, including the private banking system. These did not strike Bernard as ideal circumstances for entrepreneurs to grow businesses. However, the state was convinced that intervening in the economy would boost productivity. So what did Bernard do? The only thing he could do. He moved to America. He handed the keys to his French business to a trusted associate, and then concentrated on developing properties in Florida, where there was a real estate gold rush. But moving across the pond was not an easy decision to make. Arnault felt more like he'd been pushed to leave than wanted to leave his home. Years later, he remarked that, quote, "When you haven't studied in the United States, it's hard to be accepted. It's difficult for a Frenchman to succeed there." That might explain why his Florida ventures sought out the help of a Franco-American graduate to search for plots of land to develop on. Nonetheless, he learnt a lot about business from the fierce American market, and he learnt a lot from American culture. Legend has it that the first taxi he hailed in the US had a driver who was gushing about how much he loved French culture. Arnault asked him if he could name the sitting president, but the taxi driver replied that he couldn't, but, quote, "I know Christian Dior." This tickled Arnault for two reasons. The first is he'd sensed the power of brands, so hearing that a French icon had traction with a guy like his taxi driver in a country across the world was interesting. The second was that it reminded him of his mother. Arnault had been close to his mother and noted her love for the perfume maker. Little did he know at the time, Dior would be the reason for the French government to ask him to return home. But before that time, he had dollars to make. One of the best-known American projects was the Princess beachfront condominium complex in Palm Beach. It cost $21 million to make, with $17 million loaned from Barnett banks. The rest came from Arnault's personal finances. Thankfully, it made a $3 million profit, according to Arnault at least. A former collaborator said it lost $3.5 million. Judging from how the project went, it's easy to see why Bernard Arnault would want people to overlook this smudge on his otherwise shining resume. The princess had many defects when the site was finished. The balconies were too narrow, and the bathrooms were not well equipped. Plus, the bedrooms were too cramped to accommodate the king-size beds which Americans are fond of. Yet that's nothing compared to the location. Despite its scenic, panoramic views of the ocean, a nuclear power plant was pumping out fumes less than 10 miles away. These issues dented the appeal of the 19-story, 199-apartment luxury complex. Though the site was eventually sold, and no ties to Arnault remain, his two other Florida projects were equally disappointing, so he did his best to keep his US activities a secret. Eventually, he moved to New York. He was bored and feeling like he was in exile in a new home which didn't want him, until one day he heard about the Boussac affair. Marcel Boussac had a textile empire back in France which included mills, factories, and a brand called Dior. But things weren't going great for Boussac. The empire was going bankrupt, and even the companies that tried to bail him out were going broke. The government intervened because not only were there thousands of jobs at stake, Dior was as much a part of the textile industry as it was of French identity. However, the French socialists were having a hard time justifying the use of public spending to prop up a failing sector. They were bottom of the polls, got their butts kicked in the European elections, and had to back down on major policies in favour of more pragmatic central ones. Mitterrand had started on the political right, slid left, and ended up in the middle. Here, he could see clearly. He saw that he needed a savvy businessman to come in and save this ailing industry. So they changed the system to entice investors. They reduced business subsidies, reduced business charges, and introduced austerity for employees such as wage freezes. These conditions were exactly what Arnault needed to grow a business in France. But it was clear that what he really wanted was the Dior brand. He returns to France to buy up Boussac's discounted empire before it's too late. $15 million worth of the purchase came from his own pocket, with the remaining $45 million coming from the French financial institution Lazare Frères. It was worth it. 3 years later, the company was in the black and then some. But big changes had to be made. One of the first things to go was the disposable diaper division. After that came the layoffs. It's still a sore spot for the workers in the areas where the workshops used to be. They say Arnault had promised the unions that he would save jobs. In fact, initially he saved 12,500 employees, which was 1,000 more than another bidder. Yet that dropped over time. Now the areas where workers lived have suffered economic ruin. Everyone knew that Arnault wasn't really interested in the textile industry, he just wanted Dior. This was his ticket into a new industry. Under his leadership, the new company earned $112 million on revenue of $1.9 billion from the year before. That means he had taken a broke company, trimmed the fat, dropped the waste, fired the employees, and ended up with the streamlined, luxury-focused enterprise that was actually profitable. One move was all he needed to take him from fledgling real estate mogul to a bona fide luxury overlord. But Bernard Arnault was just getting started. One thing unique about the way Arnault runs his businesses is to focus them on a single target and make them decentralized. To him, the most important thing isn't about whether a company will be profitable in a few years, but whether the brand will still be revered in a few decades. This interest in longevity led him to conceive his most daring acquisition yet, LVMH, Louis Vuitton Moet Hennessy. Get ready for an Ocean's 11-style hostile takeover. It started before the merger, when Moet Hennessy was its own entity with Alain Chevalier in charge. He'd noticed how a boom in the luxury champagne and spirits industry had boosted their stock value, and he also noticed how stocks were getting bought up. He feared a takeover and turned to his friend Henri Racamier, who was in charge of Louis Vuitton. Think of them like Gus and Hector Salamanca from Breaking Bad, with Bernard Arnault as Walter White. Chevalier shared his fears with Recamier, and the two agree to merge so that they are a bigger company which will be harder to take over. Once they merged to form LVMH, 51% of the stock was owned by the families of the four brands which comprised its namesake. Taking them over would require someone to play the board against each other, but who's big-brained enough to do that? Enter Bernard Arnault. His success with Dior had earned him street cred and helped him become friends with Recamier. This was exactly what Arnault needed to pull off his heist. You see, the marriage of Louis Vuitton and Moet Hennessy did not have a long honeymoon. Recamier didn't like being number two, and Chevalier enjoyed reminding people that he was number one. Their feud was so public that everyone heard about how Recamier printed some stationery with his name above Chevalier's, only to have Chevalier destroy it. Internal conflict bred chaos, and chaos bred opportunity. Whoever was trying to buy them out wasn't deterred by the rise in their stock price. In response, Chevalier sought the help of Guinness plc, in the same way Hector Salamanca sought the help of Tuco. By offering Guinness a 20% share, it added an extra layer of security from any buyout. Plus, the loyalty would help Chevalier in the boardroom. But this decision was done without Recamier's consent. He was angry that the guy he partnered with was now deciding how much of his company could be given away. Civil war broke out. So Bernard Arnault was summoned by Recamier to become his muscle, in the same way that Gus brought in Walter White to help him outdo his own business partner. But you'd be a fool to think that he'd hand over his prized Dior so easily. Walter White, Bernard Arnault, promised to protect the company from external threats. A promise he technically never broke. But once Bernard was firmly embedded in the company, he allied himself with Moet Hennessy and Guinness, so long as they promised Arnault greater shares. The trio then bought 24.5% of LVMH stock for $1.5 billion, which you can imagine did not make Recamier a happy bunny. In turn, he snapped up 33% of shares to acquire control, but over the next 3 days, Arnault purchased $60 million worth of shares to gain 37.5% of the company. And just like that, he'd become the biggest shareholder. Months went by in a battle of attrition to be the owner of the biggest luxury conglomerate in the world. By January 1989, Bernard emerged the victor when he acquired 43.5% and 35% voting rights. The war was over. The takeover was complete. Arnault was finally in control of LVMH. All it took was playing his competition off each other, switching alliances at the right time, and making sure no one noticed that he was getting ready to snap up the company right when everyone else thought they were crossing the finish line. So, was Bernard Arnault one of the investors who prompted the stock rise which led to the LVMH merger in the first place? It's hard to say. The market was doing well at the time, and Arnault is as interested in making money as he is in securing brands. So even if he wasn't the direct catalyst, there's no doubt he was watching the luxury market closely and waiting for the opportunity to strike. When Bernard Arnault strikes, it's a death blow. True to his Terminator nickname, Arnault consolidated his power to become CEO and chairman, and Recamier and Chevalier were forced out. Over the coming years, LVMH snapped up brand after brand, yet one has eluded Arnault more than any other. It may just be his downfall. Hermès is a French luxury design house specializing in perfume, jewelry, watches, and ready-to-wear clothing. With contributions to the arts, it's as much a cultural icon in France as it is an international luxury brand. It's also a family-run business that isn't in a rush to sell. The family owns 65.1% of shares, which gives them a staggering 74.8% voting rights when allocating net income. But Bernard Arnault has never seen a business he couldn't buy. So, in 2010, the then CEO of Hermès, Patrick Thomas, was cycling through the French Alps when he received a strange phone call. It was Arnault. He was calling with a brief message to let Thomas know that in 2 hours he would announce to the world that he owned 14.2% of Hermès. This was a complete shock. No one knew that Arnault had acquired shares. But how? Back in 2001, LVMH established a number of subsidiaries to acquire equity derivatives through financial intermediaries. By creating distance that way, they would not be legally obligated to declare their holdings. In Breaking Bad terms, Arnault got his own Jesse, Badger and Skinny Pete to run errands in secret. Through these covert back channels, LVMH snapped up 4.9% at the start of the millennium and then stopped. More than likely, this was a test to see if anyone figured out what Arnault was up to. 4.9% is a small enough stake not to be seen as a threat, but also big enough to get noticed. Bernard likely figured out that if he went unnoticed, then their defenses were weak. So why on earth did he announce to the world that he was inching towards owning a fifth of the company? The answer is obvious. Bernard Arnault loves a fight. Unfortunately, this fight was too much for him. 1 month after this surprise announcement, the French government had an announcement of its own. LVMH was being investigated for insider trading, collusion, and stock price manipulation. 1 month after that, Hermès set up a private holding company to own 50.2% of shares. It gave them the right of first refusal when a family member decides to sell shares, but really it was a way to protect the majority of the company from Arnault's takeover machine. Getting this kind of setup required an exception from the French government. One would typically have to offer to buy out minority shareholders first. If LVMH did go on a shopping spree, Arnault would still be compelled to buy out minority shareholders. More than likely, some of these shareholders knew the Hermès family or were sympathetic, so were prepared to stall Arnault for as long as possible. The fight was so public that in March 2011, Hermès CEO Patrick Thomas categorized LVMH's method of acquiring 20% of the company with a phrase that can't be read out loud by a YouTube narrator. By the end of 2011, Arnault announced he had 22.6%. Slowly but surely, he was devouring one of the few brands that he didn't own. If Hermès wanted to survive Bernard Arnault, they had to think like Bernard Arnault. By mid-2012, Hermès had filed a separate criminal complaint against LVMH, where they accused Bernard and his cronies of insider trading, collusion, and manipulating stock prices. Such an accusation is the nuclear option. Not to be outdone, LVMH filed its own complaint for blackmail, slander, and unfair competition. The gloves were off. Every boxing match has a referee to make sure no one is playing dirty tricks. The French authorities finished their investigation and reviewed the complaints both companies leveled against each other and announced that they had uncovered wrongdoing on LVMH's part. Bernard Arnault hadn't lost a fight like that since he tried to squeeze a king-size bed into a Florida condo. Their conclusion was that by buying stocks secretly, LVMH was interested in owning a stake in the company as opposed to just buying stocks as an investment. But there's no smoke without fire. Of course, Arnault has always denied the claims of a takeover bid. He's sticking to his story that it was an investment, but we know better than that. In fact, by mid-2013, LVMH's stake had reached 23.1%. Not that it mattered. By autumn, the court rulings had come through, forcing LVMH to distribute its shares over the next 5 years. LVMH fulfilled its obligations and paid an €8 million fine by the end of 2015. With all legal disputes between LVMH and Hermès resolved, the two companies parted ways. However, Arnault personally owns 10% of Hermès shares as a typical investor. No doubt this helps the Hermès family keep an eye on him. But Arnault had one more ace up his sleeve. After the Hermès debacle, he stuck to what he knows by buying up brands like Bulgari and Tiffany & Co. Yet his smartest play was in 2017 when he sold Dior to LVMH. That's right, the brand cherished by his mother, the brand that got him into luxury, the brand so dear to French hearts, had been owned by him and not his company. Well, to be more precise, it was owned by a private holding company controlled by a single major shareholder. He sold it to LVMH for $13.1 billion. Maybe he'll use that money to fund another takeover on Hermès, or maybe he'll snap up more brands until Hermès has nowhere to go, or maybe he'll simply ride into the sunset. Whatever happens, you can be sure that Bernard Arnault is already planning his next move. If you liked this video, check out our one on Del Vecchio to understand how he turned eyewear into a must-have luxury item. And be sure to subscribe to keep learning how history works.